Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing a couple of recent signings for the San Jose Sharks, and a couple of really solid ones. The first is Jaycob Megna signing a 2-year deal worth about $1.625 million, which means he's making about $760,000 per year, and a Barabanov contract, also 2 years, worth $5 million, meaning he's making about $2.5 million per year. We will start off with the Megna contract, which I feel as though is liked by most people, though I'm sure there are going to be a couple of people who disagree, as there always are. But this Megna contract is rather solid. He came up last season when the Sharks were dealing with those COVID issues early on. They had Karlsson out of the lineup, Middleton out of the lineup, Vlasic out of the lineup, and so they had to bring up multiple defensemen from the AHL, and Megna was one of them. He actually performed rather well in the small window that he was given, and then later on in the season, when the Sharks were dealing with a few more injuries, and of course the trade of Jaycob Middleton, Megna came back and actually asserted himself as a rather solid defensive defenseman for the San Jose Sharks, even getting time with Brent Burns on the first pairing. And so it's really no surprise, especially for the San Jose Sharks, who don't necessarily have the best defensive depth on the left side, to bring back a player like Megna on a very, very cheap offer. You see, going into next year, the Sharks will be pretty much set on the right side, at least hopefully. They'll have Burns, they'll have Karlsson, and they will have Ryan Merkley. And unless Bob Booner does stick around for another season and continues to have this sort of weird relationship with Merkley where he decides to bench him for no reason, this should be the three right-handed defensemen that the Sharks are running with, barring any injuries, for the entire season. On the left side, however, there is a bit more of an open set of spots. Obviously, at the top, you'll have Mario Ferraro, and he'll be playing with Brent Burns most likely, could maybe play some games with Erik Karlsson depending on how the pairings are going, but you have two open spots for a few different players, Megna now being one of them. The other would be Knyzhov. Of course, he was injured for the entirety of last season, so we don't exactly know how he's going to come back. He could come back and pick up right where he left off at the end of the 2021 season and still be a solid defensive partner for Erik Karlsson, or he could kind of be significantly worse and maybe not even be a consistent NHL player. You never know. There's also, of course, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who is very unlikely to be bought out this summer, I would say, just because of the financials of the situation, so he probably will be back and could definitely be an option to be a third pairing left-handed defenseman for the San Jose Sharks. And then there is also Radim Shemek. This one seems a bit less likely now just because of the comments he made just a few days ago where he discussed how the San Jose Sharks management, they lied to him and all of those things. So at this point it seems kind of unlikely that Shemek will be able to earn a top 6 spot in the lineup, and honestly it even seems somewhat unlikely that he'll be a San Jose Shark by the time the next season starts. So it's pretty clear that the Sharks do need that help on the left side, and Megna will indeed provide that. The other contract was Barabanov, and probably one that is a bit more exciting for most people. Barabanov, I would say, has become a bit of a fan favorite. I know he's one of my favorite players on the San Jose Sharks currently. I've mentioned this type of comparison a few times before, but he reminds me of a more consistent Jonas Donskoy. He played a lot of time on the top line with both Meyer and Hertl. He complemented them very, very well, and just generally was a solid player for the San Jose Sharks. And I remember the rumors from a few months ago was that he was looking for a Robbie Fabry type deal where he was trying to get about 4 years at $4 million. And now this contract obviously comes in at significantly less than that. Not only is the money amount much less, almost half at $2.5 million per year, but the term is indeed half at 2 years. Now, some people who might not be super familiar with Barabanov might be thinking, shouldn't the Sharks have tried to tie him up for a bit longer than that? Maybe gone for that 4-year contract. Wouldn't that be better for the San Jose Sharks? But it should be noted that even though this was Barabanov's first ever full year at the NHL level just this past season, Barabanov isn't necessarily all that young. In fact, he turns 28 in just about a month's time. So by the end of this 2-year deal, he will be turning 30 years old. He's not some 24 or 25-year-old player that you'd be locking up for 4 years, and that would be 4 almost prime type of years in his career. Barabanov, once he hits 30, you never know what could happen after that. So if you signed him for 4 or 5 years, you could be in for a couple of years of decline. And considering the San Jose Sharks already have a ton of massive contracts on their team, Burns, Vlasic, Couture, Carlson, now Tomas Hertl as well. It's kind of a nice change of pace to get a more short-term, more sort of lesser risk type of contract that Barabanov does bring. When it comes to the money amount, I was a bit surprised that this was actually this low, $2.5 million. I was expecting more, at least $3 million for him, but I can imagine there was a bit of a frank conversation that went down between likely Joe Will, who is filling in or as the interim general manager for the San Jose Sharks, as well as Barabanov's agent, and it was pretty much a frank conversation that said, you know what, you played most of the season with Meier and Hertl, you ended up with 40 points, you were kind of propped up a bit by them, even though you did play a big role on that first line, but coming into next season, there's likely to be a bit more competition in the top 6, the top 9, we might spread out Hertl and Meier, and so in a situation where you're not, Barabanov being the you in this situation, a situation where Barabanov is not playing with Meier and Hertl, it's a type of situation where he's not going to be able to be as effective as he was at times this past season. So wouldn't be surprised to see him, keep up a consistent 35-40 type points, which is perfectly fine for a top 9 player, but for a first liner is not necessarily amazing, and so that kind of explains much more so the drop in monetary value that he had at $2.5 million. But it's a solid contract for the Sharks. In fact, I think both of these contracts, Megna and Barabanov, were both very solid, and so while there have been a lot of misses over these past few years for the San Jose Sharks when it comes to these big behemoth type 8-year deals, I feel as though usually the Sharks seem to be getting it right for these couple years deals, getting players on the cheap that can help fill out their depth. Class dismissed.